Alright, it's Coach Nefarious, and I'll be analyzing our game of the 9th of July. Let's get started. So, first of all, the game's on a pause, so we have plenty of time. Let's just talk a little bit about the matchups. You got Ornn versus Jax in the top lane, Jarvan versus Hecarim in the jungle, Ryze versus Veigar in the mid lane, and Tristana Morgana versus Ashe Nautilus in the bot lane. Now, Tristana Morgana is designed to have priority in that lane. Haha, that's going to be nice. It's going to be good. Kind of a siege poke kind of lane, right? A little bit of catch in there as well, but should be hard to catch out with Morgana unless it's like it's situational. It's not like Thresh where at any point in the lane you can create a lot of pressure with your hooks and just gamble it a little bit and then you lose some pressure. It's just a big rock paper scissors game. But in the mid lane, we have Ryze versus Veigar. Ryze usually doesn't take priority, but Veigar, I don't like that pick at all. I don't think that's appropriate. This draft was done by the famous Endeavor, but obviously it's Valence League. Haha, I coach for Benelux Premier League, I coached for LP LOL, and I coach for Scouting Grounds. Haha, I'm a bigger ELO coach. Hehehe. Right? It's like I can play those games all day with the most toxic coach in all of VL. But that's not the point of today's review. Today's review is going to be about assessing the game plan, assessing whether we can complete it, how difficult it is, how sound it is, just everything about it, you know, the whole shebang. And this is it, this is such a good setup. Oh goodness, this is such a clean setup. Yes. Okay. You got the flash, that's fair enough. Jarvan would commit to this a little bit less if he asked the Morgana to bind immediately. Or not immediately, just have the Morgana throw the bind. But that's a little detail. That's just a little, you know. This is completely fine. So this sets you up in the bot lane, which you eventually want to snowball for the game to work. The game plan was very simply defined as get mid lane ahead first. And then at level 6, make sure that at some point you send Ryze bot lane with the Jarvan and try to 4 or 5 man. Right, that's the plan. The outcome should be that bottom mid lane are winning, of course. And that's like the definition of success here. The definition of failure would be if we either fail to get Ryze in the position to gank bot lane, or we fail to transition that lead onto the bot lane. Okay, so Ornn gets first blooded. What's up with that? I really like that Jarvan took Krugs here. I mean, it was kind of forced into it, but it would be really sound if that was intentional as well. Anyway. So, let's just take a look. I should stop saying, So let's just take a look at wave management here. If I were up against the Jax, Jarvan is going to eventually route topside. I don't think either jungler is very scary early on, so you can either opt for a bounce or just get pushed. And like, I think the Ornn takes natural priority in this lane in the early levels. Eventually, Jax is going to be a monster in the duels, but before that time, Ornn has a lot of wave clear and actually quite good base damage as well. Jax is just more of a scaling monster, so it takes him a while to get going. Level 3, for example, sure, Jax has some trading patterns that can pack a punch. Not overwhelming, but also not underwhelming, right? So looking at this is completely fine. You started with... what? With Q? Okay. Bellow's Breath is the cookie cutter ability of Ornn. If we compare the two abilities, this does about 100 damage and can be dodged. This does... look at this. It deals 12.5% of their max health as magic damage. That is insane. Minimum of 80 damage, extra damage against champions. Which usually at that point gives you a grass proc as well, which you might not get otherwise. And it deals 20%, oof, up to 12%. 12% plus 12%, that's 24%. You're dealing if we look at this health bar, then 10% would be, so you get 80 plus 50. 80 plus 50, 80 plus 60, that's level 1, right? That's a pretty decent chunk of damage, level 1 actually. I gotta say, I'm not... Wait, did I fuck this up? Alright, it's Coach Nefarious and I'll be doing a live analysis of this game. So first of all, take a look at the compositions, take them in. This is the composition on the blue side, this is the composition on the red side. Usually I call them out. I don't feel like reading 10 champions out loud right now. So anyway, the game plan was very simple. If only it was that simple to execute. We're going to look at how Jarvan is going to try and snowball mid lane. And then how Destiny and Jarvan, Destiny and Magath, are going to try and snowball their lead onto the bot lane. If that succeeds, then the game plan succeeds. If that does not succeed, then the game plan fails. Very simple, very, very straightforward criteria. Gonna look at how difficult it is to execute this game plan and whether we will be working with this in the future or not. Alternative game plans are ganking bot lane directly, or getting a mid lane with natural priority and focusing top lane early game, playing around Herald. There's a lot of options that you have. Right, look at this bad boy. Boom, brittle proc. Okay. Brittle proc. It's 2 minute 40. That's when Hecarim's done with a 3-camp clear. When any champion, really, is done with a 3-camp clear. Sinzao, world record, 229. And this is when you flash. Alright. There's a little bit of micro in this lane. If you are at this point, if you are in that position, if you ever find yourself in this position, this is obviously an awkward spot. There's no ward arenas. Top lane spent a ward here. This... Ooh, I wasn't specific enough. So Raptor ward is always the duty of the mid laner, because this ward also prevents the gank on top lane. This ward or river control, like if you have the Tribrush ward and river control, then you can protect against a gank on top. Otherwise you need a more defensive ward setup. Let's say you just accept the fact that someone can come in like this, then you don't place the ward in the brush. I don't know what people's obsession is with brushes, as long as they can't sneak in here like this over the wall. So what you do instead is you take this ledge that you want to cover, you take the furthest point away from the top of the map, so you just go furthest down as you can. That's this point right here. And then you just go down until you wouldn't see this ledge anymore if you drop the ward here. That's the warding position that you want to use. That's going to spot Hecarim the deepest into the river, and is going to cover this little ledge here, so that he can't sneak through the Tribrush. That is a ward that's commonly used in pro play for very good reasons. It's just like the solution to a puzzle, you know. If you wanted to flash here, you could do it here. I don't think you're gonna live. In fact, I think they don't need to flash to kill you. But at this point, it's more hopeless, right? Especially if Jax doesn't route towards you, but routes over here towards your escape path, he can stall an auto attack and wait for a second and try to see if you commit to flashing, right? So they don't need to flash after you, which is a very, very big sign that you should have held on to it. Alright, that's a lot of attention to micro play, which I'm usually advised not to do, and I'm doing it anyway. Haha, who's here to judge me? Except literally everyone watching. Alright. So let's just keep on looking. Okay. This is a dangerous situation. Hecarim doesn't beat Jarvan in the jungle by default. Jarvan... Essentially, one route that you can opt for as Jarvan. If you see Hecarim over here, essentially, if you're doing Krugs and this, right, and you have a smite, what you can do is do Raptors, try and survive them. You're gonna be almost dead, and then base, right? So you're putting yourself on the map with full resources for the scuttle, and for the level 3 gank, right? You gotta get level 3 from those 3 camps. So then you can go into river and decide to gank first, or get scuttle first and gank. maybe put a ward down again, reestablish vision. All those things follow from you being able to put yourself onto the map, into a favorable position. It is a really good call though, like, I wonder if this is Hecarim's own thoughts, because that is pretty uncommon, if I do say so. This ward is not optimized. You see that there's no direct vision of the blue buff, and that's because, like, that is something I ask a lot of teams that I coach, can you ward the blue and Gromp? They always say yes, and then I say, okay, go ahead and do it, and then they can't do it. So, for here it's easy, there's a particular spot in which you can do it, you can test it out in practice tool, and for this one it's a little bit harder. It's more important to get vision on the Gromp than directly onto the blue buff, because you can always see someone, you know, like, taking the blue buff. Essentially, when they get into here, into this little spot over here, you can see them entering into the blue buff. You just can't see how low it is, which is kind of a disadvantage, right? It's just a small optimization. Just make sure that you get vision over that wall when you do get the ward to ward there. That is a good ward in a bad position. Alright, enough about that. Also, if you had a compass with you, then you could also do it, right? If you had a compass, like if you just imagine, if you're using a compass, you need to understand that you have to get vision over the center of a camp, right? Essentially what you do is, let's see, can I do this with tools that I can find around me? MacGyver this stuff. I don't want to say this shit. It seems so unnecessarily hostile. Let's see. So if I take... this is too sticky. I don't want to screw up my monitor. What if I take a pen? I'm just going to take a pen. Something that doesn't screw up my monitor. Yeah, that sounds like a pen won't do that. Yeah, sure. That sounds very sensible. Let's take my tablet pen. The tablet I threw out the window. And just... I know you guys can see this. I'm very well aware of that. I'm just going to try it out. I don't mind experimentation. Okay, so... It doesn't matter how much overlap there is. So I'm gonna mark these 2 points. Okay. And then I'm going to go to the center of the blue buff and mark that point. And then in the center should be right over here. That's not correct, I think. I don't think that's correct. That looks very off to me. But then again, if I look at where the blue buff is... Yeah, maybe more towards here. Maybe on this line. Well, if you look over here... Let's put file 4 off. And we do the same experiment. You're gonna notice the positioning is gonna be different. So, I'm gonna put one over here. Okay. And then one over there. And that's exactly right. So then you end up in this little triangle. This little triangle on the floor. If you put it in there, you'll see it. Okay. So now you know the spots. I just established that with my pen. Now that is some advanced coaching. Okay, I'm kidding, but you get the point. It's a good wording spot. Just want to experiment, have a little fun, you know. Skip through it, you know. If you don't want to see me fool around with pens, can't imagine that you'd want to miss that, you know. Alright, back onto the topic at hand. McGoff is level 4 now. Rise is pushing. Let's see what causes this. Like, let's see what wave tactic is selected here. So, Rise is coming back from push under his turret. There's no reason to go back this far. You need to make sure, if you want to elicit ganks, you need to look proactive in the lane. Because, why do you need to do that, you might ask? Is there really a point? Yes, there is. Okay, maybe you weren't asking that. But the point is, if you don't, and you suddenly become proactive because you're about to get ganked, that's easy to read. That is telegraphing information to your enemy. There's a gank coming, please back off. You can fake that, but let's just keep it simple for now, and just stay proactive if you want a gank to happen slightly in the future, right? Because if you do it now, well before a gank, and someone responds to it, they have to come back eventually and actually play the lane out. Otherwise, you win by default. That would be a way of winning the mid lane. Now, we achieved our goal without ganking. That's fine, right? Ganking isn't part of the game plan. That's just a way of achieving it. It's a method, not a goal. So this is a good example of where pushing the wave prevents us from getting down a gank and obtaining the... Alright, so that's end of part 1. Part 2. I'm going to start now. This is what I remember. This is a very common setup, right? And it all revolves around the fact that we create a gank setup in mid lane. We don't create vision... See, we have vision control on the top side, but we're not going top side to try and get the gank up. And we don't really finish slow pushes and get vision control on the other side. So we're kind of in this uncanny valley. In this uncanny valley between... What do we do? Like... Okay, so you have no control over topside at the moment. Where are Magath's next camps spawning that are a big deal to him? Where's the scuttle that he can contest spawning? It's over here, right? So this is where we need to establish control. Well, you need to establish control on the side where things are gonna go down and happen next. So if you're gonna go to Drake soon, like if you're playing for a Herald early game, then you're going to try and establish control over top at 8 minutes, right? And that includes vision control. But right now we're playing for mid bot lane. That involves the bot lane scuttle because we got forced out of top lane. We could have gotten the top lane scuttle. I'm not saying that's fundamentally flawed. But due to the circumstances, we end up controlling the bot side of the river. Here you have a pink ward to spend. So you can spend it. Your route is really clean. That much I will say. You're routing directly onto these Krugs. No time waste. Very clean. Yeah. Very sound. And this is where you would need to ward that. Like, our ward... Remember, our setup in bot lane is not to gank it directly. Our game plan was to... gank Rise as often as we can, pre-6. I will show you, you know what, I will show you a team that clubber stomped our team on LP Long First Division in like 16 minutes by ganking mid about 8 or 9 times. 8 or 9 times is not an astronomical figure. You can make that happen. Right now, gank setup, right? Okay, you clear the ward. That's a resource wasted on their team, not on our team. That means we can come again. So we control the bot side. If they have control over the pixel brush, you ward over here. See how the Nautilus never reaches there? And then you also spot them moving through here, right? You don't want to EQ on this when they're all missing. That's a little bit of danger awareness in your own jungle. Sometimes the enemy jungle, it can be a little bit of a fixation that when you're in your jungle, you're kind of safe, and when you're in the enemy jungle, you're in danger. But the higher you get, the more it becomes clear, like, hey, these people are moving all over the map, and it's really just purely dependent on whether laners are free to roam and where they're gonna go. Like, honestly, right now, for example, their red buff, you'd be entirely safe, right? Even though it's completely into their jungle. You're like, what if the Jax comes? Well, he's billion years away. You have a bomb plant. Right, while over here, bot lane is base. They are free to roam. So there's... Oh, they wasted a lot of summoners there. So just keep that in mind. The concept of... I guess... I would call it adapting to danger. So danger, we kind of naturally feel like the further we go into the enemy jungle, the more dangerous it becomes. That's just a natural tendency of how we perceive things, right? It's just like, let's say the road, a good example of this are road markings. Just by placing markings on the road, you kind of tend to stay away from them. That's why there's markings on roads, mostly. It's not as a visual reference. The reference is nice, but it's mostly because you create a certain amount of distance between the cars. So if you put double markings down, even if they can be crossed, right? It's like, it's really it creates a certain perception. If there was a wall, right, on the side, you're gonna naturally stay away from the wall, even if you know perfectly well what your positioning is. And it's not about whether you hit or not, it's about the perception of danger. It's just like when you're sitting in one of these, what they're called, those buses, right? Those really tall buses, when you're sitting at the top and you approach a tunnel. If you approach it slowly, your perception of the height of the tunnel changes. It feels more comfortable. While if you go faster, you're like, I'm going to die, please get me out of here right now, right? Even though, really, if you think about it, the visual, you looking at that tunnel, it's the exact same height. You're either, like, even if you're going at a relatively slow rate, if that thing hits you, you're pretty much cooked either way, right? It's just risk perception. Alright, that's a little bit of a wide and just, like, broad point. I just want to mention it. I just feel like it. A little bit of context. We'll be talking about risk awareness and planning more in the future. There's a lot to say about it. It's essentially, you can write volumes about it, or talk volumes about it. So again, like, our bot lane has priority, and we want the priority, right? That was not the problem. The problem is, if you look at how are we creating gank setups. We get a flash early on from my gank setup that you were a little scared of, right? And you notice there's nothing to be afraid of. Nobody almost died. This wasn't close. It was just an easy peasy lemon squeezy gank. So now you're on the bottom side of the map. You're gonna drop really hard from Krugs. This should naturally make you think, okay, I'll need to base at some point. If you based after Krugs, I'd be completely alright with that. Actually, that might be, holy moly, actually, that might be the best route. That might be an improvement over Raptors. But either way, which one you choose, I think that's a big improvement over Raptor now that I think about it. But that's not the point. The point is you should at least at some point go base before you try and pressure the other side of the map, right? The map that the side of the map you really want to focus on the level 2 and 3. Because right now you are out of everything, right? And if you're afraid of losing resources, remember, he clears camps at a relatively similar rate. You're better at ganking than he is early on. Despite his... That's just how it is. That means you can go to his blue buff, for example, right? If he steals yours. That's vertical jungling for you. So we don't have to be afraid. Especially not because bot lane should get natural priority. And if they don't, then you're going to lose a blue buff. It's not a big deal. But look at this. So this is the first setup, right? This is just quick wave management. If you need the wave to stay in the lane, what do? Well, that depends on the state, right? If it's pushing into you like this, then you need to slow it down, but you're out of mana. So if you're out of mana, it means you spent a lot of resources pushing very, very quickly, and you do have a tier. So in that case, you need to send Jarvan out to the other lanes, which was not the game plan. Here you have full mana. And you're completely fine, right? You don't need to spend like mana with the W on a minion. You can just save the mana here because it's gonna help with your wave management when you need it. Your mana is mostly spent when he tries to push waves into you and you want to receive a gank, so you're gonna slow him down to not let him finish the push. That's where your mana is gonna be spent most of all. So you can trade. That's where you can spend your mana. You can slow down the wave eventually, but mostly you just want to not touch the wave. Okay. Ideally, you don't want to miss any CS unnecessarily. So if you have no ward, then you don't need to walk to the side of the lane. That also puts you in a choke. So if Hecarim was coming, that would kill you. Because you're going to get sandwiched by the Vigor over here, right? So, essentially, trust in your vision, trust in your skills, and stay in lane. If you don't have priority. Like, you should only be roaming. Even if it's just a tiny little movement to the side. Like, just like this. Even if it's just a little bit off here. If someone starts pulling you in to a particular side here, you can get cut off really hard with the cage. So essentially you want to make sure you keep yourself between Vigor and the turret. Because that means that if you're moving directly away from him, you're not getting stuck into the terrain. You're moving to your point of safety, right? So you're doing two things at once, moving away from him and into your turret. It sounds really trivial, but that little positional aspect right there is 90% of League of Legends in a nutshell. So right here would be an example, right, of if Magav wants to gank, he could do it here. I'm not telling you that you have to do X, Y, or Z in terms of... What I am saying is that you need to try and make the ganks work somehow. You need to make up your own little plans during the game based on what the enemies are doing. I don't know exactly what they're going to do. Nobody does. You don't want to spend any mana on the wave because you're going to fuck it up, which means you have to spend even more mana to fix the wave. Right? So when these minions are full HP, you know you have to auto them twice. You know this minion only needs one auto attack, so that's also set up. This one needs auto Q auto, I think, right? I don't know the damages by heart, but it looks to me like it needs auto Q auto. Yeah. So you know you can prepare this minion with an auto attack, and if you stall it, if you stand on the left side and stall it, then you can let this minion walk further down to get that CS. Again, you can go really deep into micro. The game has so many different ways of expressing skill. It's really beautiful. Here you want to find a good opportunity to base. And one good opportunity is on a cannon wave like this. This is why you want to go base. So, you don't want to stick around here and wait. Because that's going to... Essentially, Vigor just wasting his mana as well. But usually, you want to base if you have your tier here. That's just as a general rule of thumb here. You can't shove this wave out and not have it, like... You have to realize it's impossible to essentially shove a wave out over here if you're taking a while because you don't have a lot of mana and wave clear. Like, you have some wave clear, but not enough to instantly shove this out. So it's not going to be arriving at the turret before these minions. Look at this. Like, I'm just gonna call this. I'm a coach by the way. I'm a coach by the way. I love it. It's always like, there's always this nervous part of me that's like, what if this actually hits the turret and I'm just dead wrong about everything I thought I know about wave management. But, haha. See, this is freeze Reno time for the Vigor. This is not good. So what Hecarim can do here is shadow mid lane and make sure you can't TP onto the lane. And Vigor is starting to meddle with his minions and break the freeze because he does not feel like he should be freezing or something. I don't know, like... You should just kill the melees and leave the casters up because the casters are further away from the turret. And then you prevent that from happening. And then he uses up a quarter of his mana bar for no reason. There's a lot of little things. There's a lot of little micro in League. You can notice, right? I can talk about this for days. It all matters. That's the important part. It all matters a lot. If you want to execute a game plan, it comes down to saving up mana. You know, getting those extra little bits of experience in. Not letting the enemy freeze on you. Now you have to walk all the way back. You can just TP on the wave. Not miss anything. Send Magav in, right? Get him killed. You can do that in a couple of minutes. With a little bit of attention to detail. On the little parts. So for example, this would have been an example where Magav going for Krugs puts him on low HP. And if you didn't push the wave early on, the wave would have still been somewhere in the center. That would have been a gank setup for Magav. So because of this little freeze scenario here that happened as a consequence of trying to shove it, even though it's all the way over here and you can't keep on pushing for one more wave, that kind of created this scenario where we can't gank mid lane for a while. Now it's gonna bounce. What you want to do is, if you want it to reach the turret, you want to make sure that you don't touch the wave at all. Like, not even with a Q, just last hits maybe, just try not to touch it. If you want it to freeze, you need to thin it out. Because this is going to push hard. So, you know, call in Magav, communicate if you can gank on the bounce. If not, then just don't touch a wave. If you can, you look for trades, you look to thin out the wave. You're going to play proactive in this lane. In that case, you would be mostly focused on thinning out the minions and getting CS. Right, and in this case, if you want it to hit the turret, So if McGough doesn't want to gank mid lane, that's something you need to discuss after every time a wave bounces, right? If this lane is the main point of the game plan and we said we want to gank it, this is when we can decide how to play out the lane to set the gank up. So make sure you talk about that at that moment, right? Okay, it's going to bounce back into me. Can you gank on the bounce or not? Well, no, not really. I'm half HP. Okay. And then you don't trade because you're going to get screwed on his bounce, right? Then Hecarim's going to be there, right? So you don't trade, let him shove. And he shouldn't be pushing, right? He should just be last hitting, but that's where he is not aware of the same concept probably, right? So you get that interplay where everyone gets free CS for decades. Alright, that's a little bit of an overview of wave management and how the game plan can be executed through how you play out the trades and the wave management. You can notice that 3/4 of, even in solo queue, but especially competitive play, 3/4 of the lane is determined by your wave management. And the trades kind of follow naturally from little moments in there where you're like, well, I want to thin the wave out. How do I do that? Well, he's zoning me, so I have to keep even in HP to make sure I'm gankable, right? So then the trades follow from your wave management and your game plan. Alright, that's it for this one. Hopefully I didn't bore you guys to death on this one. Hope to see you guys in the next one.